Hi, I'm Dave DeWitt, and today I want to talk a little bit about democracy and religion. First, I want to read a quote from a Harvard professor called Clay Christensen. It's a little bit long, but I found it very interesting. Here's the quote. Some time ago, I had a conversation with a Marxist communist from China. He was coming to the end of a Fulbright scholarship here in Boston. I asked him if he had learned anything which was surprising or unexpected. And without any hesitation, he said, yeah, I had no idea how critical religion is to functioning of democracy. The reason why democracy works, he said, is not because the government was designed to oversee what everybody else does, but rather democracy works because most people, most of the time, voluntarily choose to keep the law. And in your past, most Americans attended a church or a synagogue every week, and they were taught there by people they respected. Americans followed these rules because they had come to believe that they were not just accountable to society, but they were accountable to God. Then Professor Christensen added this. My Chinese friend heightened a nagging concern I've harbored inside that as religion loses its influence over the lives of Americans, what will happen to our democracy? Where are the institutions that are going to teach the next generation? Americans, they too need the voluntary choose the obeys of the law, because if they take away religion, you can't hire enough police. That's the end of Professor Christensen's quote. Now, I'd like to make a few observations. I suspect the point of the Chinese Marxist communists was that democracy won't work in China or anywhere in the future because religion is fading away. The professor's point, and that of the company making the recording, I guess, is that we need more churches and religious institutions. The Marxist economist from China made three mistakes. Number one, he makes the mistake of thinking America is a democracy. I find that most foreigners and many Americans make that mistake. That's why they think Hillary Clinton actually won the 2016 election. But America is not a democracy. It's a democratic republic. Democracies only work when you have good people, such as in a club or a local chapter of some organization. But usually a democracy can be described as the lunatics running the asylum, which fails when people figure out that they can vote themselves free access to other people's money. In a democracy, republics, lunatics may elect a lunatic to represent them, but more knowledgeable people will elect a more knowledgeable representative who, even if they represent less people, can offset the lunatic. So America is not a democracy. It's a republic. Second, the Marxist economist from China makes the mistake of thinking religion is critical to functioning of democracy. He ignores his own illustrations of churches and synagogues, which are basically just churches, and synagogues are a minute part of the American history. The early immigrants who came to America were primarily Bible believers who worked hard and were morally and financially responsible because they are following the Bible. The Chinese Marxist ignores the fact that religion did not help people keep the law at all when Muslim countries became democracies. The remaking of Iraq into a democracy and the spread of democracy throughout the Arab Spring brought radicalization and chaos. It's those who followed the Judeo-Christian Bible that allowed for what he mistakenly called democracy. Religion does not generate people who voluntarily choose to keep the law in Muslim, Hindu, and any other religious country. The best functioning, most sane government in the Middle East is Israel, because they at least has a distinct memory of the biblical morality and its economic values. Number 3, the Marxist economist from China makes the mistake of confusing democracy with freedom. What he is observing that works because of the Judeo-Christian Bible is freedom. If you decrease the belief in the Bible, you will increase the need for government. That's why the decrease of belief in the Bible is followed by an increase in government control, say with the American Democratic Party, socialism in Europe, and Marxist communism in the old Soviet Union and in China. But the Marxist economist was right about two important things. Number one, early on, America worked with legitimate government because people believed, quote, that they were not just accountable to society, but were accountable to God, close quote. A belief in and fear of the God of the Bible is the only thing that limits the need for government. What the Marxist economies called democracy, which is actually freedom, works because people, most of the time, voluntarily chose to obey the law. I've seen this in aviation community. There's no way the FAA and the air traffic controllers could sufficiently police aviation. Aviation works because most pilots, most of the time, voluntarily choose to obey the laws of aviation. There's one time in history where this worked perfectly, where people required no government at all. The one group of people who were brought together without any governing structure was the church, started by Jesus and the apostles. Jesus said the world's leaders have authority, but it's not that way among you. Whoever wishes to become great shall be your servant. The greatest leaders being the greatest servants. The only authority in the church they started was Jesus himself and the apostles who brought the revelation of God to his church in what we call the New Testament, which included a belief in the inspiration of the Old Testament. But the apostles appointed no apostolic representatives. They only appointed elders and overseers and deacons and leaders and all who were to be servants and responsible, not officers in authority. They taught, encouraged, and served. They did not control, punish, and legislate. The church was a band of brothers and sisters where the more mature served the less mature. There was absolutely no government in the church. They started because people believed, quote, that they were not just accountable to society, but were accountable to God, close quote. They required no government because Jesus said, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. And most people, most of the time, voluntarily chose to obey him because they loved him. Those who didn't and strayed from the path were brought back to the path by the discipline of loving brothers and sisters, not punishment of authorities. Bad news is, as soon as the apostles left the scene, the church began to be defined not just as believers, but as an entity, an assembly, an organization, some structure where anybody could come, instead of it being a band of believers and brothers and sisters who, among other things, gathered themselves together. The gathering itself was called the church. They became a society, a social entity, which included unbelievers. So it required a governing structure. It required bishops and pastors and metropolitan bishops and cardinals and popes and patriarchs. It now required government because it was no longer a band of believers, but a social structure. They invalidated the Word of God for the sake of their tradition. And that required government. Those who loved to be first among them warped the church of apostles and started by creating the social structure. The good news is the original church, the real band of believers and sisters, where the more mature serve the less mature, still exists. Some are involved in the social structures we have set up, some are not. But they're not identified before God by those structures. They're identified by the fact that they see themselves as not just accountable to society, but accountable to God. The most of them, most of the time, voluntarily choose to obey the law. They also tend to find each other and assemble themselves together. Thank you for listening. A longer paper on the subject with footnotes for the quotes and scriptures available on our website, relationalconcepts.org.